Christ College Freshman Production originated back when Dr. Van Kusrow of the theater department was teaching in Christ College.
The idea of a freshman production came when Van Kusrow came home from Coventry after 4 years of working in this program there, and immediately saw that the idea of theater could meet the need that we all felt of adding another dimension. And that's what the freshman production was all about, to add this dimension to the life, the academic life of the student, and thus to round it out in a very creative way.
And because the class sizes in CC are really small, you actually don't know that many other CC students until the freshman production. And it really sort of melds the class of 90 or so CC students into a unit, a team.
And then they're given this task to write a 90-minute long musical theatrical production in 10 weeks from scratch. They begin with ideas that are generated out of the readings in the freshman program, classical text of philosophy, literature, history, theology. And they come up with a storyline, and then they add all the components to fill out that production.
I think it's very much a process of sort of baking a very elaborate cake in which many of the ingredients and processes along the way are discarded, but everything's focused on that final product.
A normal time frame for a professional new play is often on the order of several years between when the idea is conceived and the actual production is made. And so you can imagine that when a class of freshmen are told that they have to create a brand new musical in 10 weeks, it can be somewhat intimidating.
Oh my gosh, the production was really intense. You never think that the weeks will be upon you until they're right there. We kept thinking, oh, we've got plenty of time, until suddenly we didn't. And this was back in the years before computers too, so when I was writing out the score, I was writing it out longhand. I mean, I wrote out each individual part for the instruments longhand on a graph sheet of music paper.
And I think one night that I will always remember is when I was helping to write the sort of signature song in the piece, and it wasn't coming together, and we had one more night to write it, and it was really great to just get with my group, band together, and sit down in a little basement rehearsal room in the VUCA next to an out-of-tune piano and just pound out these notes and try to get something on paper that we could sing for our classmates the next day.
And it was intense. We had a lot of rehearsals where things maybe weren't going so well and we had to fix things, and how can we do this, and it has to happen right then.
It's a very intense process, though its intensity tends to concentrate on the last 3 weeks of the 10. When everybody begins to panic and realizes that they're going to have to go public with this and feel that they're not anywhere near ready.
10 weeks is misleading. It's actually way less than that, because if there's nothing written, you can't learn your script, you can't figure out the costumes, you can't write the music to it, and so it actually comes together in like the last 2 or 3 weeks.
There's always a moment where my class says, this is never going to happen, this isn't going to come together, and I have to reassure them that every year it does.
I think it's largely because they feel a responsibility to each other. They're working on this together. They don't want to let each other down. And so it creates this intense sense of camaraderie, of team spiritedness.
There's a quality of incredible cleverness about many of these. If you look back over the productions over the years, I mean, some of them are so ingenious.
The first production was very, very interesting. The students had already in their academic work spent some time studying the history of Joan of Arc. And so we decided to use that as the theme for the first Christ College production.
I remember, for example, most vividly the first one I saw, which was called Off the Wall. The wall was a crumbling wall on an archaeological site somewhere in the Mideast, which had a series of inscriptions on it. And of course, the course is called Texts and Contexts, and the idea was to show how you could go completely wrong in understanding a text.
One of the things that I do remember from actually that fall was sort of having this vague gleeful sense of, I can't believe that Christ College is actually letting us get away with writing a play about a singing, dancing, mutated pot roast and making that the central character of our show.
Don't think there's something wrong with your head, 'cause I'm a dancing pot roast and they're all dead. We're victims of nuclear activity, not products of drug-induced dreams.
People just were sort of surprised and excited at the possibility of going down this somewhat silly road that also had the opportunity to actually engage with some of the text that we were reading in an interesting way and in a way that we hadn't ever really considered doing before, that you could combine somehow Aristotle and infomercials and pot roasts that sing and dance.
And then cleaning up our acts was one where it was a competition between two corporations, both developing a cleaning product, one of which was very effective in cleaning but smelled horribly, and the other one smelled wonderfully but couldn't clean. And so it was a battle of two corporations and families that were trying to get their product ahead.
I know there was some big scene at the end where they like graffitied this back wall and people had to come spray it down, and that's when they figured out that the two formulas needed to be together. And we took this like middle of the night trip to the Home Depot to look through their shelves for like what painters wear when they work out, and we got these whole body cloth suits, trying to make them look like hazmat suits, basically.
My freshman production was in the fall of 1982, and it was called Give Me Something to Believe In. The title of my production really resonates with me now because it's something that, as we look back in 35 years since we've performed it, it's still true today. People are looking for profits, which was the focus of our production. People are looking for things that they can believe in.
Scott Nolan played the magician in our play as a play titled Abracadabra. There was a moment when we were rehearsing and he has a bird at one point that he's showing he's going to bring the bird back to life. And so he pulled the bird out of his box after resurrecting it, and Fritz Diepenthal on the sideline made this like cooing dove noise. Everyone laughed so hard that we ended up adding that to the show.
One like Aladola was essentially a set in early 20th century American immigration, Italian immigration, and was the most sort of sophisticated, historically constructed production that I've ever seen. And there was a show called In Sam We Trust, which was about this extremely charming, clever, almost seductive figure. Secretly, he was dishonest and was taking funds and misleading the community.
It was the very first production that I was here for, called Exit Playwright. And the premise of the production was that there was this playwright, this young man who had lost his inspiration. And then he discovers this magic pen.
You have a pen. Got it. I'll try it in Western.
One of the things that makes the freshman production absolutely unique is the quality and character of the musical talent that can be drawn on in this university community. There's nowhere else like that. You know, I always think some year we're going to have no one who has the talent to do this, and there always was.
Even ones who may not have felt really involved early on, after that show, after they've all performed it together, there's just this communal sense of pride and joy and accomplishment.
Almost every single time I encounter an alumnus or alumna of Christ College, they bring up the freshman production. And it's usually in the context of trying to convince me that their freshman production was the finest freshman production in history.
There is certainly a huge level of pride. Each class will have a very difficult time admitting that any production other than theirs was as good as theirs.
They also do want to believe that they were the very best. I think everyone feels that at heart somehow theirs was the tops.
So the traditions that are part of the freshman production that are perpetuated from year to year are what give it a lot of its nuance and a lot of its life.
One of them is the t-shirts, and we have t-shirts from all of the productions. And one of the things I love when they do the production every year is that we display those.
One of the very early sessions when they would first begin talking about the production, John Stephen Paul would always have all the previous t-shirts strung up on a line up in the refectory. So that I think they got a sense of the tradition of the production and of Christ College itself as a part of this enterprise.
So ours was a long sleeve purple shirt with this playing card in the spirit of magic that had these two dads' faces on it.
Another important tradition is that everyone in the class, and there are sometimes 90 or more students, everyone in the freshman class has to appear on stage at least once during the production.
It's always performed in the Christ College refectory, our common space that we have that's used for all kinds of other communal events. And while at times that has created constraints, it's also meant that it feels very much as if it belongs to this community and not to another one, even if other spaces might be technically more attractive.
We've seen both extremes. We see value in both. You've got family vacation.
The four directors of the Christ College freshman production over the years have been Dr. Van Kusrow, John Stephen Paul, JSP, and then Dan Cobbler, and now currently, and for the most recent years, has been Isaac Shep.
I think all the directors have shaped the production in a variety of ways. JSP in important ways, but even Dan Cobbler worked with JSP and then took over after him, shaped it in ways that brought in contemporary issues along with the text from freshman program. And Isaac's brought in a lot of staging and new techniques for how to work with the space. And so every director has shaped this tradition in their own way, in ways that make for really rich experiences.
Well, John was a member of Christ College as a student, and he was also part of Van's work in Coventry. And when Van would ultimately retire from his work at the university, John just naturally replaced him.
John Stephen Paul was a mentor of mine when I was a student here. He had a very, very strong sense of the connection between what we talked about in the classroom and how that connected to real life and how to actually try and carry that out in action.
Oh, I loved working with John Stephen Paul. He had a way about him that was just so curt. I loved his simple directions. You know how you do that thing? Don't. And you could tell that he was really, really affectionate with his students. He cared about the product, and he also cared about the students.
I think he was a marvelous artist and director, but also a genuine teacher. And also teaching not simply technical skills, but what kind of human beings are we as we engage in this act of collaborative learning.
One of the things that was my favorite thing was when he laughed, because he had this great big, he would let go and his head would go back and he would just laugh. And if you made him laugh, that was such a thrill.
I think it's impossible to imagine the Christ College freshman production as it evolved without John Stephen Paul's capacity to create and exemplify community, and community through art. Many people think of community as simply social, but I think he always thought of it as also something that had to be imagined into existence. And that's what the freshman production has always done, is imagined that we are all engaged with one another in a process of creation and reflection.
When you take your final bow, you're really proud of all the work that you have done, and you're proud of your classmates. You're just sort of in awe that you've managed to pull it off.
I think the feeling of accomplishment and joy and pride and relief when they take that bow is palpable in the room.
And I know that every time I see that DVD on my bookshelf or hear one of those songs stored on my computer somewhere, I'm going to remember the amazing experiences I had working with so many incredibly talented, incredibly dedicated people.
And going through the process, the bonding experience, learning to work with others, learning to come to a greater understanding of yourself and your world and your community, that's the CC way.